New managing moderators can support your channel. Close. Thank you. I don't need any moderators. I certainly don't need the stupid fact checkers of Meta. Woo! Don't mention Jesus. They'll put you out in your ear. Especially you Google cranks. That has nothing to do with the wet sleeve engine. No, it doesn't. That's just a fact of life that I have to put up with talking to you folks. Gutless. A gutless atheist is what it is. Look, I believe in God. More than that, believe in Jesus Christ and his salvation. But at the same time, you're an atheist. You don't want to hear it? Please, just they have this thing here called the no button. Just go bye-bye. See ya. Gone. Out. Okay? Because it's going to slip out. It just happens after 60, well, no, 57 years. That's right. I'm 64 years old, but 57 years a believer in Christ. If that bothers you and offends you, oh, Lord, I hope so. It should offend you. You ain't got him. Anyway, once we get past that and talk into the website, stop with the religion and this. That's not religion, that's faith. But at the same time, religion and politics, what's there to talk about? Weather? They can't get that right. So just, if you got a problem with that, just disappear, please. Anyway, who? No, he's not my hero, but Andy of Farming, Fixing, Fabricating, good stuff. Pete of Just a Few Acres Farm, he's the subdued side, and every once in a while sticks his nose into a little politics or something. He steers clear of religion. Yeah, anyway, he puts in a little philosophy. Well, it's just your belief system under a different title. But that's okay. It's called YouTube. So it's his tube. This is my tube. That was Andy's tube. And there's a bunch of others. The Walker Farms that I listened to. Mentor Pilot. Who is it? Kelsey at 7.4 Gear. Bronco Lirio channel there with Juan. There's JoJo Snow or JoJo Nico. I don't know what she's got. Follow her once in a while. And there's what the heck's that cute little chick's name? I can't remember now. Must have been really important. On Instagram, there's the men's divorce coach. I can't remember her name either. She does a great job describing what men go through, because in divorce, when it's forced by the female side, it's a whole different story for a man who's got a good heart. She's a good coach. All right, now we got past that part. The philosophical and the friendship list. There's a bunch of others. My cousin Matt Diedrich, there's Roger Diedrich, Paul Diedrich, all of those that are on the technical side of fixing tractors and farming all themselves. And Don Livingston. Don, I can't, you a junk dealer or something? But anyway, that's it. I don't have any sponsors. I just got a pile of friends on there. Wet sleeves. Okay, let's go there. You like that opening? I just blew 3 minutes and 16 seconds. Okay, in a wet sleeve tractor, we're going to go through a couple of things fairly quick to start. Now, you've got the head off, you know it's a wet sleeve, all right? Take a look between your sleeves. You're looking for cracks. You don't see anything obvious. Just keep going. You got your pan off, your oil drained, your pan off. And at this point in time, you take your rod caps off and your pistons and everything out. One thing I will tell you that you rarely hear from someplace else. If you're thinking of reusing the sleeves, check for a ring ridge at the top. Yes. If you're not going to reuse the sleeves, it doesn't matter much. But if you have a heavy ring, which is rare on any sleeve, but it happens, I have seen it, mostly dry sleeves, but wet sleeves as well. If there's an edge up there, take your die grinder and take it off. I mean, pack it full, so because if the metal chips fall down between the piston and the liner, it ain't coming out easy. I don't care about damage. Well, if you don't, and you're not going to cover that little area between the piston and liner, then just drive them out. It makes it a lot harder if you don't. But you clean it up with a ridge reamer, old-fashioned ridge reamer, scraper, or the mini lathe type. Either one works in this case well. And then one or the other, you may not be able to use the scraper type because it might not go low enough. You might actually have to be sure you use one they call the machine type. It has a machine tool bit that's specific for that, and you turn it, and as it turns, it rises up through. Now, sometimes there's not enough space, you have to reset it. In some cases, your tire is almost an inch below the deck. 1/2 inch or so. So either one can work. You're just looking to take that sharp edge off to get your pistons and rings out without really driving. Because why? If you fail to drive carefully with a proper driving tool on the rod, you can cause havoc with the crankshaft that's sitting there, the camshaft that's sitting there, and to damage the rod. You're not necessarily going to bend the rod on a nice big heavy diesel. Some of them don't have that heavy a rod, and you start wailing on them with a 6-pound hammer to get that piston up out past that ring ridge, or in some cases taking the sleeves with it, you've just caused damage to the rod, and you don't know which direction it's bent. So now if you thought you were going to be doing a nice clean overhaul, you no longer are. You're going to send your rods out to have wrist pin bushings in them, and if they're only bent slightly, to have the bushing machined so that your two bores are in line, parallel. It is that important. Oh, a lot of space in the old engines. No big deal. Yeah, it's a big deal. If you etherize your engine, your rods are probably bent. All right. Power cell, maybe not. I'd be careful. Okay. Anyway, let's start with that. So you got it cleaned up. You got your rod, your piston out, your crankshaft's turned so that the connecting rod journal is 90 degrees to the side and wrapped. Cloth preferably, but heavy paper towels will work. Cardboard, something, so that you can't make a mistake. You drive your piston and everything up out of there. Now, you want to take your sleeve out. Well, they make discs to go, and the American stuff that's based on the American inch system. Well, you can probably call Owatonna, Kentmore, all those companies from SPX that are all together, or have somebody machine out a disc and slide that up in there. Now, the disc needs to be 3/4 of an inch thick minimum with at least an 1/8 inch ridge. The ridge shoulder has to slide up into the sleeve. And then the outside has to be slightly smaller, about 10 to 20 thousandths smaller than the outside of the sleeve going up through the lower bore. That's the critical one, because the upper bore is larger, period. It's very rare that the upper bore and lower bore are the same internal diameter, but they can be. Nothing says they can't. But usually it's thinner at the bottom because most of your work is done at the top, the combustion and everything. So that's why it's larger at the top. The disc is meant to go through the bottom hole. And on a sleeve, you only need to pull it up about that far. Now, some of you are going to say, put a jack under there and jack that puppy up in the air. You know how often that works? In 45 years of work, goose egg, none, ever. I've heard of stories where it worked, but they jacked the tractor up in the air, and in some cases they brought a loader in and pushed down on the front of it. It's like, please, guys, just use the proper puller. Now, here's the other side on these. You want to drive them up out of the engine. That seems like such a good idea, and you're trying to swing a 6-pound maul uphill on on an in-frame. You're only going to be swinging with about 4 pounds, because you got to get that thing moving. Okay? If your engine's out of the block and you've turned it upside down, and you're careful with your blocks that are supporting it, nice hardwood blocks, but soft will do, then make sure you're close, relatively close in, and drive it straight out, down, and hold a little firm pressure against it. Now you can pop it with a good solid pop, and they tend to come out. But underneath, driving up, that doesn't work very well at all. So I'll get a heavier hammer. No, because now you have the same problem swinging the heavier hammer. So it does work occasionally, but it's rare. The nice thing about it is you get them broke loose. And if you get them up there just far enough, you cover the block deck, you get your pry bars under there, start it up, then you get your rolling foot pry bars, sometimes indexable bars, of the exact same size. Okay. Material over top of the block to protect the block deck. Pry them up out, and once you reach the about the 1.5 to 2 inch range, you're pretty much clear of your O-rings down below. Then you bring it up through, and you either have to jam them through, or if it's possible, go on the bottom and reach up and pull the O-rings off, or if a sleeve next to it is out, reach in, and there's usually a gap in there, reach in there and pull the O-rings out. That'll make coming up in a lot easier. You say, that's a lot of fumbling, pulling them O-rings off of there. I'll just yank it through. Well, go ahead. That's your problem, not mine. I've tried that a few times. It doesn't always work. I know. Put a big old 6-inch block on top of the deck and pry. There's a lot of stuff you can do that's just not worth it. Take the O-ring off. If you can cut the O-ring and pull it and turn the sleeve and peel it off the sleeve, why not? It just makes life easier. Yeah, it's a little longer, not that much. Get it out, get your wire wheel out, and then cover your crank and any other hole. A lot of people are going to use wire wheels. I prefer not to. But if you do, make sure you're keeping your RPM well below 3,000. You want very low RPM because it's going to throw the... And don't use those small little 1/8 inch wheels. That's worthless. You're better off using, if possible, if you can get a big enough flap wheel, to get down in there and use the flap wheel carefully. And you want it fairly, at least 120 grit, if not more, 180s, to get that lower bore cleaned and the upper bore cleaned. And you may still use a wire wheel to get the corners, but you know what I'm saying. You're going to clean it up. Shiny, nice and clean. Finish it off by hand. Get it all beautified. Take your sleeve and clean it up. Get the oils off of it. Set the sleeve carefully. Set the sleeve in place. Spin it. Make sure there's nothing in the way there, okay? Now you're going to check your deck height. How far does the protrusion, how high the sleeve rim is above the deck of the block. That distance is how much that head gasket ring, the fire ring of the head gasket, meets the fire near the firewall of the sleeve. Not all diesels have firewalls sitting proud on the sleeve. Some are flat, just like a gas engine. They're power cell engines, maybe some pre-combustions. But any direct injection has a firewall. And the gasket fire ring sits just outside that firewall. Well, where that gasket ring sits is what we're talking about. It needs to be slightly above the deck, so when you put that head down there and you start torquing, that fire ring crushes against that sleeve. A, holds it in place. B, seals it in place by that crush. So if your sleeve isn't within its normal specification range, that fire ring isn't going to compress properly and you are going to have trouble. If you're above it, then that fire ring gets compressed or attempts to compress too much, and the problem you come up with is, that's right, you don't get enough clamping force where the water ports and the oil ports are, and you end up with a leak. Or you blow the block out because you push that sleeve down and they're so far, you crack the ledge that's bored in the block. So you keep your sleeve protrusion. How do you check it? Well, there's two ways I've checked it over the years. One of them is a very small straight edge. Lay it right on that rim of the sleeve, hold it very gently, and then put your feeler gauge in there, and that'll tell you how much. And you're going to check it in at least 4 places. Across the block from left to right and front to back, like in line with the crankshaft. And that'll give you an idea what your standout is. You want it less than 2/1000ths differential all the way around that thing. In other words, the highest and the lowest setting are less than 2/1000ths. And usually, on direct injected engines, usually 2/1000ths is the minimum height above the deck. So you're talking thin feeler gauges here. So between 2 and sometimes it's 5 or 6/1000ths. It's a common number. But as they get old, and you're talking power cell engines, they'll usually go with either flush to 3/1000ths, like 0 to 3. If it's below the deck, I wouldn't. I'd find a shim. And if you get a 2/1000 shim, you're golden on almost any engine. So now you got your sleeve set. You're going to do this process with all of these sleeves. Okay? It's important. Now, what are you going to do next? You're going to take that sleeve back out and double check, be sure everything's clean. You want to install the sleeve. Great. You're going to turn the sleeve upside down. You're going to double clean the outside again. Make sure it's very clean and lint free as possible. Light lint is like a paper towel or something, isn't going to make much difference. But you want to use a shop rag, not a cloth shop rag, because that leaves lint behind. But a regular one of these little wondrous things here. Another one I like that seems to work very well is Viva paper. Is it Viva? Yeah. And they work very well too. But you need these shop rags that are almost lint free. Clean it up with brake clean so there's nothing there and let it dry completely off. You're going to put your O-rings on dry, 2 or 3 of them that I've seen, Occasionally there'll be two with what they call a square crevice seal that sits up above the O-rings against a little ledge that's in the sleeve. Whatever your sleeve is, when you go to put them on, you put the ring, start the ring on, hold one side with your hand, and take your pick and slowly work the ring around. Now the pick angled, forward direction that you're traveling, and out just a little bit. The out helps roll it down. The forward direction helps wrinkle the thing down. So keep going until you get it all the way down. When you're in the groove, stand your pick straight up, let the O-ring push it against the sleeve, and then circle it once or twice. That takes the twist out of the O-ring. Now hopefully, if you've put it in and done all of this on the first groove, all right, and if that's the proper ring, first groove, you're done. And then do the same with the middle ring and then the upper ring, as the sleeve would call it upper. So, but if you can, you take it down to your sleeves upside down, take it to the first groove, and keep the pick in there, take it to the second groove, do your turns, and then do the same with the other. Your pick, before you start this, file or lightly grind off that sharp tip so that you can tap your finger against it, and it might feel uncomfortable, but it's not going to stab you, stick you, or make you bleed. That way, if you slip and you hit an O-ring, you don't cause immediate damage unless you really do something stupid. That's all you're looking for. Now you've got your O-rings on there. Now, you notice I didn't say anything about lubrication. Unless you're having serious trouble putting them on, do not lubricate your O-rings. Now some guys will say don't even use the pick. Well, sort of. There are occasions where you can take your fingers and run that O-ring down and drop it right in the groove with your hands. I've done it before. Start on one side, lay it right over, and then work it back and forth until you're there. But hold one little section to put the pick in there and make it one or two turns again, because you may not get it perfect. What's the twist do? In most cases, the twist does nothing, but usually what happens is when you're going down and the twist untwists or super twists, hyper twists, it'll roll up out and cut between the block and the sleeve. It'll roll, and there you are. You're scooped. Now, that's not the only reason it does that, but that's the main reason. It's the O-ring's twisted. So you're trying to get it that if the O-ring does twist, the entire O-ring twists the same amount. And if it does twist in one area, it's not twisting tighter. So you can still end up with your O-ring slightly twisted and be just fine functional. Let's see, you've done that with both of them, you got it in place, you got it all, but you're still dry. Now some of you will say, I'll never put it on dry and I'm always successful. Well, that's good. But more power to you. Why dry? The idea of putting it on dry, not installing dry, but putting it on dry, is when you do put that thing in and you lube it, the O-ring, the sleeve area, is dry, and when it hits, it starts to roll up against the upper side. If there's oil in there with too much of a film, now the O-ring can entirely roll. You're talking prevention here of the O-ring rolling. It'll go up against the groove, slide down in, and essentially once you get it in place, the thing can do whatever it wants to do at that point and roll itself back into place because the outside's lubed and the inside isn't, and the vibration will put it there. Or maybe it'll just stay right there. But the idea is that if it's lubed, that sucker can slip and cause a lot of trouble. I said, yeah, but you're going to lube it putting it in. You are. Once it's on the sleeve. Okay? Now there's a bunch of lubrication that people put on these things to put them in. All right? SAE 30 is the old style. Now, if you're going to do that, use non-detergent SAE 30. It's less reactive. The petroleum alone is going to act on it. Why add detergents and other stuff in it too? And when you're looking for that, usually it's in what they call them SA grade, SA, SB, SC. Meaning non-detergent, and the SB and C mean that it's spark ignition, but A, B, and C. A is naked mineral oil. B and C means there's some light additives in there, almost nothing. So that's why you're looking at that. The new designation as far as diesels are concerned is similar, but usually it's SA, and you might see CA, CB, CC, but that's rare anymore. You're way up there now. I think they said they're up to CM or C, I mean way up there. CM plus. It's up there. Because there's a pile of additives in anymore. That's why quite often it's not recommended to put that stuff on any of it. And so, well, yeah, but you're right. The lower O-ring gets hit with motor oil. Always does. So that's one of the reasons I'm saying here. It's not that big a deal to use motor oil, but eventually, if you don't put it right in within, say the next half hour or so, you're going to start having trouble with the O-ring swelling just from the petroleum. So you don't take your time too much. One at a time. Don't lube them all. Just you're looking to swab the deck top and bottom. You're swabbing the lower ridge of the cylinder, but most of all, you're putting a nice swab on the sleeve itself on the bottom. But you don't want it. How can I say it? Guys are going to dip it and it works, but you don't want to get it that heavy with grease either, or Crisco. That's another one. That's one of my favorites is Crisco or some type of vegetable oil. That's my favorite. It's non-reactive. The water mixes with it. There's so little in there, the petroleum oil will just take care of it. It's gone. It isn't going to hurt the engine. And if you're following if you're worried about it and you're following your break-in recommendations, you're putting in your oil, running it through the break-in period, and usually within about 50 hours, you're changing the oil. 25 to 50, you're changing your oil anyway, so it makes very little difference. And as far as being in the water jacket, that isn't going to care one bit. And the chemicals that are in that newer style antifreeze, it's going to laugh at that stuff. Gone. And if you're really concerned about it and you see a light film in the radiator, which is very doubtful, but possible if you put too much on the sleeves, then you just clean it off. Put a rag in there and soak the oil up. Especially if you use some of the, there's certain white oil soak pads that if you put those in there, they'll leave the antifreeze behind for the most part and suck the oil off first. They do work well. They're synthetic. Relatively expensive, but they work. I've done that before with oils. With the antifreeze, they tell you they have to save, which it's already ruined its basic properties of chemical properties, but it still has its glycol antifreeze in it. That we used to lay that on top of it and soak that crap out of there and then put it back in the engine. Man, let me tell you, it makes you cringe when you got a $200,000 machine there and you're reusing the antifreeze. Yeah. But there you are when you're in the field. So, don't worry about that much of it. What's another one that I've heard of? Dish soap, don't use it. Any dish soap will start to rot any bare metal. It's caustic. Even your Dawn dish soap, any of that, it's caustic. It'll start to rust it before you get anything in there. It'll start to rust it in the next hour. So just say no to your standard dish soap. The one I've never used before, but I've heard people use is tire soap. That seems to work pretty well. I tend to avoid greases, because grease can be one that gets in there, and if there's too much, gets behind the O-ring and lifts the O-ring, makes it tighter and more likely to catch and spin and twist. So grease is kind of one of those things where, get it nicely slimed and slide it in place. Put slime top, slime bottom, and then slimed on the sleeve. And if you get too much crap between the two O-rings when you go to install it, you can literally hydrolock between the O-rings. Push them out top and bottom and displace them. So it's something that I had to learn years ago when they were telling me how to put these things together. These are all the things they were telling me to do. No. So, go with that. That's why I use vegetable oil. There's no question marks. There's no question marks as if it's mixability with anything else. It's benign nature, all of that. If you want to use the Crisco grease, no, I don't recommend bacon fat. It might work. You decide, not me. You could use Crisco, but there again, light. You take the old Crisco shortening and very light. But same problem there. If you get too much in the wrong area, it'll lift that seal and cause a hydrolock problem or hydro lift. Just like hydraulics, push that O-ring out where it doesn't belong. You will have trouble. So light coating if that's all you got. I think one engine I did that with and it turned out okay. But it wasn't much different than it's just thick vegetable oil, that's all. Hydrolyzed. All right, so we've got that far. Brake fluid? Are you insane? Some jackass named Bob Freeman, that idiot that used to own Randall Implement up there. He's putting engines together with brake fluid. I told him, fire me now. I think at the time I was just about 28, 29, somewhere in there. You're 29 or 30. I said, what are you even saying? No. I mean, just brake fluid. Are you kidding? These are rubber O-rings, and if they're not, they're neoprene. It's going to wreck them. You have to have special O-rings. Well, yeah, they have it in the brakes, but they tell you to use non-petroleum. I'd rather use petroleum. He said, why? That's stupid. And I said, why? The bottom O-ring is in petroleum oil all the time. Hello? Yeah. It was. And you say, well, what's your evidence of it? I'll tell you my evidence, just for those of you wackos out there that think brake clean is non-petroleum and that's what you want. There was a case engine in, I think, a 2470 that they kept putting blocks in every a year to a year and a half. And I put the engine together, and they had a period there where they weren't even lasting a full year. It's like they'd run the thing for 6 months heavy duty, pull it apart, rebuild it, put it back together, and then go get another block for the next overhaul. They liked the tractor, they loved it, and they kept going with it. And I think by the time I started working there were 3 blocks that had been put in, and I was on number 4. And they all cracked right down the middle, and they just said, assemble it. It doesn't leak water. Okay. I'm trying to take it out and weld it or do something. No, just leave it. Okay. I started putting it together, and he says, we use brake fluid on those O-rings. Oh, no, you don't. Not this little gray duck. I said, well, you're not going to waste time, and you're going to do what I tell you. I said, you hired me for what I do. This is what I do, and it will not be with brake clean. And he started, I don't need you here. Well, that's fine, because I don't need that. Well, if you use anything else, it better be right. Okay. So I brought in my own. Yeah, because you can't get any company to buy this stuff. Even if it's recommended, you got to buy your own. So I went and bought vegetable oil. Stuffed them in. Got them in nice. Except one. I thought I cut the O-rings, so I pulled it back out. O-rings are fine. Went and got case O-rings. They were urethane. Oh, tight? Lord have mercy. Got the engine all together. Checked all the clearances as best I could for the. I mean, it was one of those things where it was a nice shop with nothing in it, kind of thing. Had an A-frame lift, and that's about it. Didn't even have a cherry picker, if I remember right. We ended up using forklifts where we couldn't hardly go with them. And we were using those little foot pump pallet jacks to pull front ends off 150 horse tractors. Yeah, it was absurd. Bent the thing to pieces. Well, it's always worked all this time. I don't see what the problem is now. Well, you were doing it on 60 to 100 horse tractors, not 150. He was such a dolt. But that's all we had. That's what we used. So when I got through the block and got all the sleeves in with that, and he says, well, okay, I'll let you get away with it this time. Let's either do it yourself. I'm getting sick of your attitude. Let's see what happens when we get it together. Got her all together, got it torqued up, put it in the tractor. And his tattletale kept telling the boss every little thing of it. He dressed it up. Stories went to the boss, and he come out, what's going on? I said, I don't know what's going on. After a couple of days, I said, he comes out and said, what are you doing? I said, what do you mean? Finishing the engine up. Why? Well, I heard you. Oh, you listen to that stupid little tattletale again? That's my right-hand man. I said, I don't care what he is. A dumb little tattletale. He can't mind his own business. Well, he knows what I want. I said, well, if you hired me to do a job, then you hired me to do my job, not my job your way. Otherwise, you should do it yourself right here in the shop. Well, I can't. I said, well, there's a couple of us here I see that were hired because we know what we're doing. That means we're responsible for it. You want us to do it your way? I don't think so. Engine got together, and a year and a half later, just before I got sent down the road, because the boss went off the edge one day, and I just looked at him and said, what in the world is your problem? The problem is I'm sick of your attitude. Get down the road. Cool. Loaded my stuff up in the car, because I didn't have that much. He said, don't you want to make 2 trips? I said, not with that moron around. Well, don't burn going out the door. I said, burn, I'm going to scorch him. I said, way out of line. I said, maybe if I scorch him, I can help you guys. Now, one of the guys that wasn't there in the shop, I went in and torched him. And when he was screaming at the customers, I torched him. They started laughing, and after the first week, I had 12 customers. They found me at the end of the week, and I was already making more money than I was working for him. Why? Because they didn't want his procedures. And what was one of the problems they had with his engines? Brake clean on the O-rings. And that was the thing. He knew they would come back. He did not want things fixed properly. He wanted a big circle. And people were catching on that it was his machines that were continuously coming back. So there were several of us that ended up on our own fixing up his screw-ups. Over the hill was another clan. Former Sharon Springs Garage, same thing. If you put it together properly so that the customer was satisfied he got what he paid for, they were angry at you. So, if you want to argue about brake fluid, it's your engine, not mine. And I had the receipts. Still do, in fact. When was the last time I did a wet sleeve engine? About 2.5 years ago. It was a John Deere, I think, a 169. It was in a dozer, 350 Deere. And we did an overhaul with Canadian parts from Britain. Fit perfect. It's beautiful. Inexpensive. Oh my goodness. Dirt cheap inexpensive. I had to call the bank to get the money released because it was across the border. They had customs and everything taken care of. The shipping was good, and they fit perfectly. Wet sleeve. And I believe the O-rings were in the block. So then I put that back together, and I didn't have the proper stuff to prime it. I came up with a gravity priming system to at least get the crankshaft. You're supposed to grease it when you put it together with Luger plate, yes. Or some other type of sticky material, like cam lube or engine assembly lube. But I wanted to lube it after that. So I made a gravity system and got oil in there all around the thing. Soaked it right up, and there was oil in the pan, brought the level up so you could detect it in the pan. I just put a funnel on there, poured a bunch of oil in there, and had it all shored up, covered it up, walked away, come back a day later or half a day later and pour more oil in it until there's about 2 in the pan. 2 or 3 in the pan, enough to detect. So that means that the gravity feed went down in all the way across the galley and got all the bearings. And he got it home, fired it up, and it's just, they had a fuel leak, and they found out they didn't tighten injector in or didn't tighten a fitting on the injector, and he was going to sell it. And the next thing you know, I find out he's digging ponds with the thing. I'm sorry, but it runs too good. I got to keep it now. Okay. It's one of those I probably should have put valve seats in it, but I followed John Deere's pattern of repair. They just said, no, cut new seats in the head. And I looked and found seats for it, but I didn't have, there was no specification for the valve protrusion. None. So what do you do then? Just put new valves in and seated them. Cut out as little material as possible. And he says, never started that good. That's because people used ether and had busted pistons and rings. 2 of the cylinders were blowing by faster than they were creating compression. So how did it run before? It didn't. There was only 1 cylinder that was firing. There was no compression. End of story. We were shocked that we could get the thing going. So that's why I'm saying to bring receipts to this stuff. 2470 case, that was a 504 engine that I worked on. Put together some 505 Cummins when I worked at Cummins. B series here and there. N14s, because N14s weren't in the certain need for certification at the time. ISX and some others, they wanted certified people on them. However, I was certified on natural gas, both for the ISB and the ISC. That was at the time, you're talking 99 to 2001. And later on, I had Komatsu from 2004, June 2004 on, I think it was. I had Komatsu certifications on it. I had an arm load. I had an arm load so bad that the one manager with a bad attitude tore the papers off the wall because he was trying to find a way to get me fired, because I kept telling him where he was screwing up and he didn't want to hear it. And I sat there, because we were similar in age, I was telling him, you're giving these kids bad information and you should stay out of the shop. You don't belong there anymore. And he got angry, and it's just, we're trying to teach young kids here how to be good technicians, not some Mr. Fix-It. Ooh, Well, that's how we always, yeah, that's how you always did it 20 years ago. Last time you were in the shop. No, I don't believe that people, technicians and mechanics, should be kept quiet, nod their head, and then go off and do whatever and make the manager feel good. You should be honest with the people you're working with, or get out of there. Okay? Moral values makes the difference between the beginning of the repair and the end of the repair and what the customer gets. And it's your responsibility on the bottom end morally, regardless of the company you work for, or should I say irregardless, for you pansies out there, to get the job right. That's why I'm on here trying to give you some things from my experience that work. If it doesn't work for you, that's your problem. I don't care. I worked out with some other shops, and one guy who did things differently than I did called me over to help him research a pump and to test a pump on a David Brown. We both knew David Brown, but I tested them far more than he had in hydraulics. And he says, well, you know hydraulics better. What would you do? And I started talking to him about it. I said, what you described to me is like 99% it's the pump. But if you need to test it, this is how you can do it. And we went through it, and how to test. He did the test, and he says, boy, is that pump shot. And he was an excellent mechanic and technician at the time, but every so often, because the newer stuff came in different, that he'd make a miss now and then without reading a book, because it had been decades before he needed, like 20 years before he needed to read a book. He knew enough of the old stuff, and there was no change in the basics from the time he got into it in the late 60s all the way on up through into where we were working just before the 90s. There was virtually no change in much of it, including power shifts from the 60s into the 70s and 80s. There was very little change. So for him, it was an easy transition. Just give me some numbers. That's it. And when something went wrong on a tractor, and he told me what to do, and it was a 70 series case, I think, or a 90. Can't remember which. 90, I think. And he said, turn your valve. No. I made the same mistake a bunch of times. He says, turn your valve 180 degrees. Turn the valve, put it together, just put the link back up, click, 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 click. 3 speeds forward plus reverse, just like you're supposed to have in your power shift. Difference between the 70 and 90s, not a lot, but the valve on the 70 series was on top of the transmission. This was on the side. Just that little difference. So, oh, crack is there. Anyway, you're seeing that's off the topic of wet sleeves. Yes, it is. But just to give you some idea that I worked with these tractors for many, many years in different varieties. My favorite over the years has been Allis-Chalmers. Always will be. Ford, didn't get a chance to work on them. Even as a competitor, even working originally for a Ford dealer, we didn't work on them. Unless there's some minor little, period. I say Ford is the most reliable tractor that there is out there, unless they're absolutely abused. And then you run into trouble like any other tractor in the market. Who has the best hydraulics? 7000 series Allis, hands down. Who's next? That's a tough one. I would say probably the white big frame series, which would be in the later models was the white Workhorse American series, the 100 horse up. They had the heavy rear frame. They had a closed center pressure compensated hydraulic system, very similar to the 55 series Olivers 285 2105, but it had not directly a transmission loop pump as the 55 series did, but it was a charge and loop pump. So it charged the main pump, so it didn't have to draw oil or depend on gravity. And it was a more reliable system. Smooth. Oh, the Oliver White systems, both of the closed center were very smooth. But the piston pumps, people didn't change the filters because it was a suction filter on the 55 series and 85s, 105, 88, 110s. You needed to change your filter probably twice a year. Well, yeah, but no, change your oil and filter twice a year. Every year, once anyway, at the very least. But it's worth it to do it twice because the pump will last longer. It's expensive. It is. It was. Not nearly as expensive as a pump and the labor to put it on and get the system readjusted. Because the pump's up here and you adjust your compensator. Yeah, no. Because down here is your unloader, your pressure reducing, your relief valve, catch my drift, power steering priority valve. There's a lot of things to look at, power steering and brakes. So that's where I'm coming from with that. It was a very Alice Chalmers system, and the 7000 and 8000 was it's PFC, pressure flow compensator. The pressure compensated while it was operating, and if you drop the levers, there was called a load sensing circuit. But when you pulled the lever, it turned the pump on, period. It went from standby, about 500 psi. When you pulled the lever, it went to full operational pressure compensation mode. So part of the problem that Alice had was they didn't have enough cooling so that you could run external motors and pumps, or your external continuously operating at 2500 psi. It just was not designed to do that. It was designed to turn on and off. That was one failure they made with that system. Guys would hook up the John Deere choppers that were designed for the John Deere system, which is already pressure compensated. You'd turn the Alice system on and it didn't have enough hydraulic cooling to handle the pump at 2500 psi and pull a great big huge load all in the same oil. And they'd overheat to some extent. So that was their only failing. But operational, smooth. Oh, plenty of flow out the back. Your power shift was a separate system from the rear hydraulics. Smooth. All of it was smooth. Just beautiful. Then they had their own lube and cooler pump through it, plus the cooler for the power shift transmission end of it. And it was all the same oil, but it was nice. 2 huge filters, suction filter and a return filter. And I don't remember, I think the internal pump, the G-rotor pump, was a charge pump for the piston pump. It just, you couldn't get a better working system, and reliable, ridiculously reliable. So as was the large frame white system. So if you change the oils, the small frame, when they had the 55 series up to the 2110, the smaller frame, if you change your oil and filter often enough, that was very reliable. And again, smooth. Whew. The only fault they had was too small a line going to the main brakes. That was the main fault. So on the 55, they had parking brakes off with mechanical rods that went in. You could get a leak on there once in a while if you didn't use them. Then it was hard because the piston would stick. There were some problems they had with their system, but nothing major. And then later on, they corrected that. So that's some of the experience I had with that. Anyway, we're coming up on 42 minutes and change, almost 43. I've talked about enough afterwards that you guys that didn't want to listen to anything after the wet sleeve, you didn't have to. It's time for me to get going. I got stuff to do too. But I thought I'd come on here and at least give some idea. I do have some background in this stuff, and it was fun. So why aren't you doing it today? Well, technically I am, but I'm trying not to get into enough of the heavy stuff because I have to do it on the road, and my back and my knees are not happy doing this stuff anymore after 45 years out there in the working world and having to muscle it around. Most of your newer shops have a lot better lifting equipment than we did back then. Let me tell you, you take a PTO off the back of an 2255 Oliver, 1855, 1955, 1755. You pull that, muscle that sucker off of there, lay it down on, and then muscle it back in a few dozen times. It's a memory you'll have for life. And it makes the international PTO that's too heavy that people pull out and work with seem like a pup. Just saying. You folks have a good day. Oh, wait a minute. I have to shut this off, don't I? Are you sure you want to stop streaming? Yes, I do.